Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto created a spy network with his shadow clones. WIP and unconscious Iruka forces Naruto to return to the academy for another year. It also marks the beginnings of a prank whose far-reaching consequences will shake Konoha to its foundations. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 24, Skirmishes. Prank Day 151. Traveling at civilian speeds was hell for Naruto's clones. With San no Kuni being past T-country on the peninsula, the clones could have made their way there in a couple of days if they'd been going at full speed. It would have taken 4 days at most getting to where they were now. It took the group 3 full weeks by caravan to get to Jinsho, the capital of the Jin province and hometown of their current employer. The leaders of the Torisen had discussed their entry in the 2 days before it happened, and had come to an agreement. A small force of mercenaries, all clones, went ahead of the main group with a message from Getsuko, and would be supplementing the young heir's guard, while the rest of the force would arrive all at once by caravan. The main reasons for that were twofold. First, as they were, supposedly, samurai and not ninja, infiltrating the city little by little would only hurt their cover. Second was that they wanted reactions. That was part of Jiraiya's spycraft training. One found a thread and pulled until everything unraveled. By entering this way, as a show of force, the group was sure to cause something to happen. Tora, who was looking around from his place at the front of a chariot, already didn't like what he was seeing. He'd gotten used to the various reactions the group invoked while passing through cities, and this was one of the most depressing yet. The streets were empty save a few drunks here and there, and he couldn't help but notice civilians at the windows looking at the group with fear and caution. He'd expected at least some hope here and there, but he couldn't find any trace of that. It took a good 30 minutes before the Torisen's caravan arrived at the gates of the Jin residence. The place was a manor at least, if not a palace, and had walls with guards at every 10 meters. The members that had been sent as an advance force were present there, along with the other retainers. Said retainers looked tired, as if they'd had long days with little sleep, and that did not inspire confidence in the least. Still, that didn't stop him from doing his job. As soon as the chariots were inside the compound, Tora dispatched everyone to their respective places. A good quarter of the troop were going straight to the walls, with others connecting with the members of the staff present. Getsuko stepped down when an older man came forward. He went before him and bowed. "I return as promised, Yatsuko-san." The elder reached down and hugged Getsuko, something which clearly surprised the retainer. "Is everything fine, Yatsuko-san?" The older man's face fell. "Subyun did not make it." Getsuko nodded sadly at the words, and waved Tora down from his place. The leader of the Torisen felt like an intruder interrupting their moment, but still came down. He then bowed to the elderly servant. "You need not bow to me, Samurai-sama," the elder said, bowing deeper. "I am Yatsuko, seneschal of the Jin family, and I thank you for accepting our selfish request." "May I be of any use?" he asked. "I would meet your lord, if it is possible," Tora asked. The man bowed again. "I will get you an audience at once," he replied, and quickly went inside. Tora then waited as the rest of his council fell beside him. He knew very little about their employer. Getsuko had remained tight-lipped about his lord, not offering information, and the group had mostly focused on what they would need to do once they arrived, and who would be opposing them. The only descriptive they had was young, and the fact that he was the last remaining member of the family. And young could mean many things when regarding nobility. A 25-year-old lord would be young by their standards. The group did not have to wait long before Yatsuko returned. "Jin-sama will see you now." The 5 leading members stepped forward, following the seneschal into the building. Surprisingly, the man led them down to the basements, stopping before a room guarded by 4 retainers with swords. 2 of them opened what was a heavy steel door, and inside was clearly a storage room repurposed as a meeting hall with a bedroom attached. "Please take a seat," Yatsuko said, indicating a number of cushions on the floor. The 5 Taurusans sat, removing their swords and laying them beside their seats as honor demanded. The retainer came back a minute later from deeper inside the room. "Introducing Jin Shippu, Lord of the Jin family." The 5 members bowed as a second person came to sit on a raised throne in the middle of the room. Tora managed a glance before averting his eyes and was surprised. The Jin Lord was a girl. And very young at that. Tora wasn't sure, but he estimated that the real Naruto was older than her by at least a year. Thankfully, his bowed head would hide his reaction. "Rise, members of the Taurasan, and be welcome to our lands," Shippa said, clearly trying for an authoritative tone. The samurai rose. Tora forced himself not to react outwardly, and decided to treat the situation as if he was speaking to any other member of the nobility. With the many experiences the Naruto clones had, this was something they knew how to do. "Thank you for your hospitality, Jin-sama," he said, bowing slightly once more. "It is us who must thank you," she replied. "The members of your group already present have been a boon to my retainers, and it may very well be that we still breathe only because of your men. The last few days have been restful like no others lately, and that is clearly due to your service." "Thank you for the kind words," Tora answered. "Now, what services do you require of the Taurasan?" "As Getsuko told you, both my person and my people require your services," the Lord explained. "Along with the samurai currently supplementing my guard, I would like 4 or so bodyguards for my person. The most important part of your troop will be needed in the city, cracking on Yakuza businesses and enforcing the law. You will, unfortunately, have little help with that part. I no longer have enough retainers to protect my own house, and the police have been eliminated to a man in the last few months. Ideally, I would like to see those who blight our lands executed for their crimes, but it is the safety of my people that takes priority, and I will be content if the Yakuza lose the ability to do our land further harm." "We will begin at once, Jin-sama," the Taurasan leader replied, preparing to leave, when something came to mind. "Any requests for those who will be your bodyguards?" The girl thought for an instant. "Who are the strongest amongst your group, mister?" She blushed, suddenly realizing she had no clue about the individual names of the mercenaries before her. "I am Tora, Jin-sama," the leading bunshin replied with a smile. "And the strongest among the group are all in this room." That was simply pretension, since the clones were all generally at the same level, but they'd found that people believed such a thing more easily. "Then you, Tora, along with the man at your right." "I am Rayon, Jin-sama," said man replied. "Rayon, yes, with 2 other members of your choice," Shippu continued. "I will trust my safety in your hands." "As you will, Jin-sama," Tora said, rising and bowing with the other Taurasan. "We will enact your edicts immediately." "By your leave." "Go," the Lord said with a nod and a smile. "And may the gods smile on your works." The 5 of them quickly made their way out, and were led to a wing of the mansion that had been reserved for Taurasan use. They found and ducked inside an empty room as soon as they could. "So, opinions?" Tora asked as soon as the door was closed behind them. "Am I the only one who finds it sad for a person of that age to be at the head of a region this big?" Kuga said, looking at his fellows. Everyone shook their head in answer. You're not the only one," Tora voiced, "but it doesn't change anything. If she asks for help, we'll give it to her, but we can't do much about it. She clearly feels the need to act as if she was an adult, and worse is she may very well be right. We don't know enough about the situation to say otherwise." "That's the first thing to fix, then," Hyo pointed out. The official Taurasan leader nodded. "Yes. And get the merchant network in on it. This is right up their alley, and we don't know if this is something with global repercussions, like the situation in Wave." While the entirety of Gato's business had officially fallen into the hands of the clone network 15 days after his death, making that the complete truth was still a work in progress nearly 3 months after the fact. Selling properties, ensuring the arrests of criminals, finding caches and sealing legitimate businesses took time, especially if one wanted to do so without drawing too much attention. Everyone agreed with a nod. Rayon, take 3 clone members with you and go back to the Lord. If she asked, tell her that I will have the second shift, said Clone nodded and took off. Hyo, Kuga, you're in charge of patrols. I'm leaving the specifics up to you. I just want more men on the ground than in wave for whenever something happens. Yes, sir. They both exclaimed. Jaga, you're in charge of the defending this place, Tora continued. You should already have enough men on hand, speak to me if you need more. I'll be doing my own personal patrol, just to get a good eye for the layout. He looked around. Everyone has his orders, so let's get cracking. This place won't fix itself by doing nothing. Hi. Everyone responded, each going in their own direction. There was work to be done. Prank Day 154. So, merchants, status report. The real Naruto asked from his place at the head of the table. The network representative rose. Well, as most already know, the false ANBU are back in the interference business. There were nods all around the table. Outside our Kirimasu suppliers who were eliminated, we have 3 other sources in other countries who now refuse to do business with us for the flimsiest of reasons, and a pair of jumpers had to escape when mercenaries attacked them. All that in the past week? Jiraiya asked. The spokesman of the merchants simply nodded. And no events like this had happened since the false ANBU base was found. The sage scowled. I don't like this. It sounds a little too much like Root to me. You're not the only one who made the link, no, the Hokage's Bunshin replied. And? Danzo is under watch as usual, and nothing indicates any link to this group, the Sandame answered. All former Root members are accounted for, and the 3 outside Konoha were confirmed to be with their respective teams for the entire period those false ANBU would have been active. No missing members? Jiraiya said, making a face. I find that surprising. There are some that are missing and presumed dead, but those under that heading have been so for nearly a decade, Hiruzen explained. A good number of former Root members went missing during the Kyuubi's attack, and you know how many empty graves there were following that event. The Toad Sannin scowled again, and said nothing. Naruto did, however. What's Root? The Hokage turned to the blonde with a smile. They were a former Black Ops ANBU branch headed by a man named Danzo. They were outside the normal Konoha hierarchy and did assassination missions, infiltrations, and the like. They were disbanded 5 years ago after it was found they had abused their privileges and performed missions opposed to Konoha's policies. So, in a way, they were the ancestors of the Dakeshi, Naruto countered. No. Hiruzen cried out, slamming his hand on the table. The Dakeshi are nothing like Root was. Root was amoral, doing whatever it could to oppose what it saw as enemies of Konoha, regardless of who they were. They started wars, assassinated Konoha civilians, and even tried to have me removed by force as I was seen as too peaceful for Konoha to prosper. I will hear no word that the Dakeshi are in any way similar to Root, and want you to put the idea completely out of your mind. Naruto gulped. Hi, Hokage-sama, he quickly answered. He then shook his head, dispelling the mental image he had of the Dakeshi fighting the Sandame to the death. It wouldn't happen, not while he had a say about it. Still, we need to solve this. Unfortunately, there isn't much I can do outside of the village, the Sandame pointed out sadly. If you give me a list of your suppliers, I'll see what my own network can find out, Jiraiya added. It isn't much, but we might find something out. The real Naruto thought for an instant. What would the both of you think would be needed to take this group out? Jiraiya and the Sandame looked at each other, and Hiruzen nodded at his student. Finding where they operate from is first, certainly, the sage explained. Infiltrating the place is then a good second step, if it is possible. If not, more general information gathering will be needed. After that, there's two ways of going at it, depending on the group's structure. You either take out the leadership, hoping that there isn't a strict hierarchy that'll allow a successor to take over easily, or you take out the troops one by one, hoping they can't replace them easily. And if both methods don't work? Nico asked, curious. Then, you get ready for a battle of attrition, the Toad Sanine countered. Those are long and bloody, and they tend not to be worth it. Such a plan will keep an enemy busy with your forces, at minimum. Noted, Naruto replied. Nico, set up a troop under your command. Their job will be to watch over our suppliers and track our mystery ANBU to wherever they lair. We'll get to step 2 once that's done. Hi. The clone said, saluting. Next point, then. Naruto continued. Techniques. We had people going over our library, and there still isn't any agreement on how we should do things. Right, another council member started. I had 24 clones going over everything, and we still can't find common ground, even after a few weeks. The numbers are split into multiple small groups, each with his own idea on what to do. Prank Day 155. Ebisu had to admit his team was shaping up well. By now, at the rate of 2 or 3 D-ranked missions a day, the group was well past 50 missions of that rank. They had more than enough to start on C-ranked missions, if Ebisu decided to do so. Still, he hesitated. It wasn't his team's teamwork. No, that had never been an issue. The 3 of them had hit the ground running, and there had never been problem at that level. Unsurprisingly, Naruto was the leader of the 3, something which didn't surprise him with the boy's personality. The other 2 were clearly followers and had followed his plans from day 1. The special Jonin had to agree that the boy had some talent in leadership, so that was a good thing. He supposed his 2 other genin had either picked up on the fact, or had been intimidated by the boy's techniques. He was the powerhouse of the group, that was certain. Part of his hesitation was the so-called C-ranked curse. He'd faced it when younger himself, when a simple courier mission ended up with his own team facing the 7 swordsmen of the mist. If Guy's father Due hadn't been close enough to assist, he shuddered to think what would have happened to them. He visited the man's tomb every year on the anniversary of his death, drinking the pain away with his team. But there was also something else. He couldn't put a name to it, but there was something going on with his team. It wasn't anything bad, just a feeling he couldn't shake, but there it was. Mainly because everything was going too well. There were no altercations. No fights, no extra sparring. Nothing bizarre that stuck out. It was like the 3 of them had been a team for years. They were used to each other in a way that you normally saw after years of working together, if even then. Yes, the Hokage had said that they were more advanced than normal genin, but this was ridiculous. Still, keeping the group from C-rank missions because things were going too well felt wrong. Team 1 turned the corner, coming back from their latest D-rank, when Ebisu saw what he hoped would be his future team. Konohamaru was there, along with Udon and Moegi, his ever-present shadows. Then the boy saw him. Ah. So, you're the poor team that got saddled with 4 eyes here, Konohamaru said, making a face. Well, better you than me, that's for sure. Those words hit Ebisu right in the gut. Omego-sama. That gut hit a disgusted face. The special Jonin was surprised to see Naruto stepping up before him. You take that back. What? I don't know who the hell you are, but no one insults my sensei, the blonde replied. Especially not a pipsqueak that doesn't know his left from his right. You tell him, Muramura said, stepping beside his teammate. Ariko quickly moved to the other side, and her face was grim. If he's the only guy who taught you anything, I could probably take you, Konohamaru boasted, stepping up. Easy at that. You want a piece of me? Ebisu stepped between the 2 group. Everyone calm down, he ordered. ordered. Team 1, this is the Hokage's grandson, Konoha, along with Moegi and Udon. As they are academy students and you are ninja, fighting them is prohibited. Konoha smiled. You're just afraid they'll lose and prove me right. Anyway, I have better things to do. Good luck, wannabes. He then walked away with his group trailing behind him. Naruto took a deep breath to calm himself. Sorry about that, sensei, he finally replied. You need to control your emotions better, Naruto. Ebisu then turned to the other two. That goes for the both of you, also. There will be many in the future who will do things like this to get a reaction out of you, and there are situations where acting like this could cause an automatic mission failure. I know, Naruto said. Just insulting the team? In the middle of the village? He scowled. That shouldn't fly. The special Jonin smiled. Thank you for defending my honor, but if the words of an academy student could hurt me, I'd be stripped of my rank instantly. He turned around. Now, to the mission center. There is a second mission waiting for us there, and sooner started soonest done. Inside, he smiled. He couldn't help but be proud of his team's reaction, misguided as it was. He now felt silly for holding back, because of a simple feeling. Give it a few more days to find the right C rank, no missions near water, for sure, and they'd be moving to the next level. They were ready for the next level, he was sure. Unfortunately, having his back turned, he missed Naruto's summoning of a single shadow clone. They looked pretty tough, actually, Udon pointed out as the trio arrived at a training ground. You sure we could take them? Konohamaru scowled. If Ebisu's all they had? Sure. Man's useless. If he was so good a teacher, why couldn't he teach a technique that could actually hit the sandame? Prove it, came a voice from behind him. The three students turned around to find the blonde boy from before. You again? Again? Yeah, me again, he answered. Name's Naruto, and I don't take people insulting my team lying down. You're just gonna cry to your teacher when I beat you, the Sarutobi child jeered. Nope. If you manage to beat me, I'll deserve the beating, he smiled. Tell you what. I'll even teach you the technique of your choice, if you actually manage to put me down. For real. By now, Naruto's smirk was positively hellish. I'll even make it easier. I'll only fight back with a single technique. An Academy one, to make things fair. That was the last straw. Konohamaru drew one of his Academy kunai. You're on. He then charged straight at the blonde. Said blonde easily dodged the first swing, then the second, then the third. He was moving back all the while giving ground, adding comments like, you're telegraphing your moves, your stance is wrong, and you're not aiming at the right places. But after a minute of evading, Konohamaru had finally backed his foe against one of the pools that dotted the training ground. Can't retreat anymore, can you? The student said with a smile. A valid tactic, I had to admit, Naruto replied. He then grinned evilly. My turn. He was then gone, and a second later Konohamaru found himself in the air and in freefall. He was there only a few seconds before he hit the pool with a splash. He quickly came back up to find Naruto smiling at him. Had enough? The student scowled. Not until I see you on the ground. The blonde shrugged. Your choice. He then vanished once more. That set the tone for the next few minutes. Konohamaru found that he couldn't even get out of the pool. As soon as he answered Naruto, he found himself back in freefall and headed straight for the middle of the water. I'll never give up. He finally shouted. Naruto shook his head. I can respect tenacity as much as anybody, but this is ridiculous. Konohamaru simply swore. Suit yourself. And the academy student was back in the air once more. Only, this time, there was a clear difference. He was higher, true, but the main thing was that he wasn't headed for the pool this time. He was headed for the ground. no. He yelled and braced himself for impact. At the last moment, he felt another switch, and a second later he was underwater once more. And once more, he broke for air. As usual, Naruto was there with his smile. Had enough this time? Yes, he finally admitted. The blonde could have let him break his legs on solid earth at any time, he now realized. And there was nothing he could do about it. Then something came to mind. You cheated, though. Naruto inclined his head in thought. How? That's no academy technique. That, actually, was the Kawarini technique, when done by someone with a lot of training, Naruto countered. Really? Moegi said as she came up, with Udon not far behind. Really, Naruto replied. Why do you think those 3 specific techniques are taught to everyone at the academy? The clone technique is great for distractions, especially when escaping. The transformation technique is the basis for all infiltration and social manipulation, and the body replacement technique is a very efficient dodging method. Yeah, but you can't beat someone with them, Konohamaru pouted. You notice you're saying that when I just beat you with Kawarini, right? Naruto said with a smile. Anyway, Bunshin is great for leading people into traps, and I even knocked out the Hokage once with a modified henge. At those words, Konohamaru was all over Naruto. Teach me how, sensei. Tell me how to beat the Hokage. This took Naruto aback instantly. You want to beat your own grandfather? He asked. Why would you do that to Gigi? I'll beat him and take the Hokage's mantle from him, just you see. The Sarutobi child answered. Naruto's eyes went wide in incredulity. Then he started laughing. That's not how it works, kid. Trust me, I know. Yeah, right. Anyway, say you're right. You managed to beat Gigi somehow, and now you're Hokage. How long until someone else comes against you and beats you? The blonde pointed out. Someone like me? Konohamaru opened his mouth, then closed it after a moment. It was clear he'd never thought about the fact. How does someone become Hokage then? There's a lot of things that a person needs, Naruto explained. He has to be a strong ninja, among the strongest in the village, that's for sure, since the Hokage represents the ninja forces. He has to know politics, economics, strategy and tactics, along with dozens of other subjects. He has to be a proven leader to be a candidate, and be popular enough that the village would follow him. All of that would take years. Konohamaru cried out. There's a reason why no one has been voted Hokage before his 20s, you know, Naruto pointed out. He knew the third had started earlier, but that had been a battlefield promotion and a completely different thing. The Sarutobi boy simply sighed. Anyway, how about I help you 3 train? The clone said with a smile. He couldn't help but like Konohamaru. The boy made him think of a younger version of himself. Really? All 3 students replied excitedly. Really, Naruto said with a nod. Let's start with what I just used. Can you all tell me the seals for the Kawarimi? The trio started talking over each other to answer. Naruto simply grinned. He'd had Iruka, and now it was his turn to help those that followed. Prank Day 156. The Torisan had now been doing patrols for a week, and it was clear they'd gotten a reaction from the Yakuza. Silence. The Lord Jin had said that things had calmed down upon the arrival of the first group of mercenaries, and she hadn't joked. Outside of a few drunks here and there, the samurai group hadn't had any issue in the city. It was like whoever the Yakuza were, they'd turn tail and hit as soon as the Torisan had entered the city. Hyo didn't trust that one bit. Especially revealing were the reactions of the people. The civilians were still clearly afraid, even after a week without enemy action, looking over their shoulders during the rare times they left their houses. There wasn't a kid in sight, even on the brightest periods of the day, and shopkeepers were reluctant to sell anything to the mercenaries. While the Naruto clones didn't drink, the non-Bunshin member of the group did, and alcohol was hard to find. At least the last fact would soon be a problem of the past. There was a merchant team on the way and expected any day now, which would help the alcohol shortage and give the team another point of view on what was happening in the city. Talking to the civilians hadn't helped, the few times they could be found, and they needed information to advance. They would be there for a long time if it didn't come. Prank Day 158. Naruto was surprised to see someone waiting for him at Training Ground 6 when he arrived there after his supper. It took a moment for him to remember who the man was, but he stepped forward as soon as he did. "You're the trap guy, aren't you?" the boy asked as he came up. Tuesday. Tekuno, was it? "You got it," the man said with a grin. "Tekuno Kanden, Jonin and trap specialist." Naruto looked around. "Not that I mind talking to you again, but why are you here?" The Jonin simply smiled. "I talked to your sensei a few weeks ago, and he offered to let me take over part of your training whenever I was available. I'd have come earlier, but, well, specialists are in high demand, you know." "I'm sure," Naruto replied with his own smile. "Is sensei coming today?" "I am," the special Jonin interrupted as he came out of the woods. "If you don't mind, Kanden-san, I'd like to sit in on this lesson of yours." "Be my guest," Tekuno answered, then turned to Naruto. "Now, let's talk traps. Tags, in particular. What do you know about them?" "They're strips of paper with an explosion sealed inside of them," Naruto replied as he'd been taught in the academy. "They're mainly used in trapping techniques, or to improve the power of thrown weapons." "The textbook answer, yes," Tekuno replied. "Now, what can you personally do with them?" "A lot of different types of traps, pits, kunai and the like," the blonde enumerated. "I know how to set them on a timer and how to prime them for contact, along with using them on kunai and shuriken." He stopped for a moment. "Oh, and I also know the Fubako Hajin." "Nice. The last is very useful, and there are never enough users who know it," Takuna replied. "Now, how about detonating a tag remotely?" Naruto thought for a moment. "No, I don't know that one. That's a classic, and it has plenty of uses. Here." The Jonin handed Naruto a bundle. "Those are training tags I made especially for tonight. They're no more powerful than a firecracker, but they explode bright green, perfect for night training. Now, set up 10 of them a meter or so apart on the trees, primed for contact." The genin did so, returning to his spot afterwards. "Now, let me show you," Tekuno said, whipping out his own tag. He made a visible show of activating the tag, then threw it forward on the ground. "A lot of people don't realize it, but a prime tag is waiting for a burst of chakra," the trap specialist explained. "Normally, said burst comes from another part of the tag which is set up to react to pressure, but there is nothing stopping someone from preempting that and triggering it remotely with a surge of chakra." He pointed dramatically at his tag, which exploded. "Since the tag is already primed, it doesn't need much, just a pencil-thin beam of energy. Now, you try it," the man said with a wave. Naruto pointed straight at one of his tags which were 5 or so meters away, and pushed chakra down his arm, thinking of a laser-like beam. He didn't get the result expected, however. The 10 tags he'd placed exploded all at once in 10 green flashes. No. Tekuno replied instantly. "That's like 20 times too much. With that much chakra, it was more a cone or a wave than a beam." "Really?" Naruto replied. "That's like barely anything." Tekuno's eyes went wide. "If I may," Ebisu pointed out from where he was seated. "Naruto has immense chakra reserves, probably greater than mine and yours combined." Tekuno looked at the boy as if he was seeing him in a new light. Naruto simply blushed and scratched the back of his head. "Well," the Jonin finally replied. "Practice makes perfect. Set up another 10, and try again. This time, try to use half what you did the previous time, and try to focus it tighter than before." "Will do." While there was slow improvement over the next dozen tries, it still wasn't a complete success. Naruto quickly reached a point where he couldn't use lower amounts of chakra, while still being too much, and at best he only caused 3 tags to explode at once out of 10. It's clear that it will take you more than a single days to master this, so let's move on to something else. The man went and withdrew something from a front pocket. Wires, he said, handing Naruto the item. We're still talking about tags, correct? The genin asked. Indeed, Takuno replied. While remotely detonating a bunch of tags close to one another is useful, there are moments when you need more than that. That's when wires come in, the man explained. It's especially useful in demolition, where you might need to stagger different explosions with different timing. Now, set up a tag and try it. It's the same concept as the prior exercise, only channeling the chakra down the wire. This time, Naruto succeeded on the first try. That's a lot easier, he pointed out. Yes, Takuno countered. But it has its own flaws. Since you're now reliant on the wire, that's a clear point of failure for enemies to attack. Cutting the string make at least part of the setup useless, and it adds extra visibility to the whole thing. Naruto nodded. Now, there are multiple ways of sidestepping those weaknesses, the Jonin continued. First, you can build redundant systems with multiple lines to connect them. Now of course that means. For his seat on the grass, Ebisu noted everything. He needed to make sure he could continue Takuno's instruction should the man be absent, and building his own knowledge base was always a plus. He could see that sharing teaching duties with Takuno had been the right decision to take after all. Prank Day 170. Team 1 arrived in the mission office at 2 sharp, as was usual. On this particular day, the Hokage was in residence, and he smiled at their arrival. He had a surprise for them. Team 1 reporting for missions. Ebisu exclaimed, standing straight. Beside him, his genin emulated him. Punctual as usual, I approve, the Sandame replied. Now, any preference on this day's mission? A shopping request, if possible, Hokage-sama, said. Ninja nodded and handed the special Jonin a scroll. Also, I would reserve a training ground cleanup if you have one available. I do, Hiruzen said with a smile. I also have the mission you requested earlier this week. The older ninja handed Ebisu a different bordered scroll. Naruto gazed at the scroll for a moment. What's so special about this one? Ebisu turned toward his team. The Hokage and I agreed that, based on your training and hard work, it was time for this team to move to C ranks. Really? Muramaru asked. Yes, the sensei replied. This is a request for a courier mission to a village near the border with Yama no Kuni. We are to deliver a scroll to the lawman in residence, and bring his reply back to Konoha. Does anyone think they aren't ready for this mission? No, sensei. Ariko replied, while beside her the 2 boys shook their heads quickly. Even the rabbit did the same. This mission should take no more than 2 weeks, so you will need to pack accordingly. We will not be having any training tonight to give you time to do so. We will be leaving tomorrow at 6 in the morning from the East Gate, he explained. I expect everyone to be on time. Hi. The 3 genin replied. Now, we have 2 missions before us, Ebisu continued. The first client is Shiromatsu in the market district. Team 1, move out. The special Jonin cried out. Hi. The trio repeated, turning as one. Both Ebisu and the Hokage could easily see the extra spring in their step from the news. They were clearly ready for it. Chapter 25, The C Rank Curse. Prank Day 170. Team 1 managed to go through the 2 D-ranked missions their sensei had chosen today in half the time they normally took, and Ebisu was kind enough to give them leave to prepare for their C rank instead of going back for a 3rd mission. As such, the group split up shortly before 5, each going in their own direction. Naruto was headed straight to a Chirako ramen to bolster himself against a long period without his favorite food, while Miramara went directly home to prepare. The three Narutos would clearly see each other later today in the Uruhara basement, but for now each had things to do. Which was why Iruka was waiting in front of the academy, counting down the time before classes ended. She didn't have to wait long. "Hey, Genin, Bunny," Ringo said as she came out, the rest of the fashion club behind her. "Long time no see." "Hello girls," Iruka responded more calmly while Ichibo waved. "How goes?" The students looked at each other. "Could be worse, could be better," Fumishi replied with a shrug. "I can't wait until they find a more permanent replacement as taijutsu teacher," Mihoshi whined. "Having a different one every couple of days is a pain." The rest of the group nodded at that. "How about the new maths and history teacher?" the Genin clone asked. She, like all Naruto clones, had been informed of the man's treachery and disappearance. "You won't hear a complaint here," Mihoshi replied with a smile. "Same here," Fumichi added, echoing her fellow students' reaction. "Rin-sensei's somewhat harsher than Kazuki was, but a much better teacher." Iruka forced down all the comments she had about how the man had treated Naruto, and how harsh he'd been. It was the past, and it should stay there. "Glad to hear that, at least," she finally answered. "So, what allows us the honor of seeing you here, on a Wednesday no less?" Nishi asked. "My team finished early, and we have the evening off," she explained, taking a deep breath. "Team 1 has a C-rank mission starting tomorrow." Mihoshi squealed and hugged her tight at those words. "Congratulations!" she exclaimed, and the rest of the group wasn't long in following suit. "Nice, you're progressing," Nishi said after a few moments of cheers and hugs. "What kind of mission is it?" "Courier mission," Iruka replied. "Tell us everything you can," Ringo added. "Better yet," Fumichi said with a smile, "let's go get ourselves a table in a restaurant. We need to give our most advanced member a proper send-off." Here. Here." the rest of the group replied. Iruka would last in the Uruhara basements that day, talking for hours with the fashion club. Some of them would even have tips on what to bring or on things to look for, but even without that the female clone would have appreciated the gesture. It was nice having people behind you who cared. Prank Day 171. Ebisu was glad to see his entire team present at Konoha's East Gate, 5 minutes before 7. While lateness had never really been an issue with them, today was more important than any day before. Sure, they had leeway on their travel time, but it was always easier to start with a reputation for professionalism than to build back to one. "Good morning, team," he said as he stopped before his students. "I see everyone is ready to go," he said as he took out a sealed scroll. "This is the document we are to bring to Fumotocho, the closest town to our border with Yama no Kuni. Are they secret mission plans, or a treasure map of some sort?" Naruto asked, clearly intent on adventure. "Nothing so grand," the special Jonin replied. "These are answers to questions the lawmen in Fumotocho had, along with orders, updates and the like." Naruto's face fell. "Do not be disappointed. While this is clearly not the most important of documents, one must start somewhere. You wouldn't expect a capital dispatch to be given to unproven ninjas, would you?" "No," the three answered. "There you have it," Ebisu replied. "Even if this is routine communication, treat it as if it were the most important decree of the Hokage. Outside these walls, you never know what can happen." The team answered in chorus. The sensei took a good look at his three students. All seemed well prepared for the trip, holsters full and backpacks not too light or too heavy. "Any other questions before we depart?" Miramara raised his hand. "How long do you expect the trip to take?" "At a good walk, we should arrive at our destination in 5 days," Ebisu answered. With a day or two in Fumotocho and 5 days to return, that gives us 2 days of leeway in case of unexpected happenings. Nuramara nodded at that. Have you ever done this specific mission before, Sensei? Ariko asked. Ebisu was about to answer when his watch beeped. 7 in the morning, time to go. We'll discuss this on the way, if you don't mind. His female student nodded, shouldering her backpack as she turned. The 2 others did the same, and the group left the village for the first time. No, I have never done this specific mission, Ebisu replied once they were away from Konoha's gates. I became a genin before the Third Ninja War, and courier missions near the border weren't given to genin then, when they were even given. I did, however, do quite a few of this type of mission, carrying messages back and forth to various other groups. Now, this was more dangerous because... Prank Day 172. Kyuha dodged back, narrowly evading a spike of rock that erupted right below his feet. The rest of the clones beside him spread out, only for a burst of wind to bring up a cloud of dust. The Dukeshi leader reacted instantly, and did a blind substitution straight up. That was a new variation of the technique the Naruto clones had developed in reaction to the rising skills of the new members of the Dukeshi. Some of the clones didn't react in time, they died instantly. Kyuha himself did a second kawarimi, landing on the side of a tree, and waited for the dust to settle. With the rain, it wouldn't stay up long. When he could see the ground again, only a single person remained standing. Most people wouldn't be intimidated by her, but the Naruto clones had learned their lesson harshly. Kyuki Ikonja might be less than 1.5 meters in height, but she made up the difference in ferocity. Among Kyokuba, the new team, she was the close-range specialist. Surprisingly, she was the only one of the team that wasn't from ANBU itself. She was a medic, who'd wanted to be moved to a more active, i.e. less boring, position, and she had no problem in using the medical techniques she knew to cause horrible damage. When under her cherry red mask with attached antennas, she went under the name of Seed. Kyuha counted the leftover markers on the ground, proof of fallen clones. 5 more of them had succumbed, bringing their number down to 15. Of course, these losses didn't go unanswered. A rain of kunai and shuriken surged from the trees, going straight for the land-bound ninja. Kyuha did nothing, expecting what would surely follow. He wasn't disappointed, as the weapons never reached her. A big boom rang through the area, and all the flying projectiles flew off course in the shockwave. Seed used the distraction to disappear, leaving only the fallen markers behind. A second later, a second explosion was heard, and one of the trees fell under the attack. One of the sources of projectiles, of course. Trunks' handiwork. The former male ANBU was, surprisingly, the team's defensive specialist. Normally, people specializing in fire techniques weren't much for defense, but Sorero Ikiai wasn't anything near normal. Almost 2.5 meters tall, he towered over near everybody, and was so talented in causing explosions that he could and did annul attacks with them. He was the one who wore a sun-yellow mask with a lion's mane attached to it. A single clone managed to land safely after dropping from his fallen perch, only to disappear a second later. Kyuha caught a flash of antlers, clear indicators of Root's presence. Born Kan Neko, he was the closest thing to an assassin in the group. He was somehow as comfortable underground as above, and was very good at erasing his presence. Forgetting to account for him was a mistake you didn't do twice, as he could attack from ambush like nobody else. The Dukeshi leader summoned another wave of Kagebunshin, then did a trio of switches in quick succession. With the rain serving as radar for Flower, the new clones were quickly found and dispatched, mainly with more explosions. The clone leader had no choice but to continue on that route, as the flagging numbers of his team forced him into summoning more clones and moving after each wave. The battle quickly became a stalemate, with neither side having the upper hand. The alarm rang after 10 more minutes of jockeying for advantage. The few remaining clones dropped out of their hiding places, while the 4 Kyokuba members did the same. Flower rose from the middle of a pond that didn't look like it could hide a fish, and Root rose beside her. "You're getting better at that, Flower," he said. Her nickname had stuck. The woman sighed deeply. I couldn't have managed 2 more minutes of this. Between the stealth jutsu, my rain sense and manipulating the puddle to give targeting indications, I was just about to fall unconscious. None of that, Seed said with a growl. I'm the one who'll have to deal with you if you fall from chakra exhaustion, and after last time, I will make you regret it, mark my words. Trunk simply grunted in agreement. Hi, Flower replied, clearly too tired to argue. Fall into position. Kyuha ordered, and the 4 Kyokuba members stood at the ready before him. Great work, team. Another test passed. You're one step closer to being full Dakeshi. That's what Kyuha had been doing for the past week. After discussions with Jiraiya, and the Sandame, he'd come up with a number of scenarios the new Dakeshi should be able to complete. Rescue missions, captures, scouting, invasion countering. They'd gone through 15 different tests to make sure they'd be able to work properly together in all situations. And they'd all passed with flying colors. Everyone nodded, save Flower, who fell on herself. And how many are left? She said, tiredness evident in her voice. Kyuha had been waiting for that one question. The other times he'd been asked this, his answer had always been a few. And he could see in everyone's face that this was what they were expecting. As such, he answered differently. None. What? Flower replied, eyes growing wide. And she wasn't the only one to react. There are no more tests, Kyuha said, waiting for them to follow. You've proven your ability to work together well in all situations. Now, all that's left is mastering the kenjutsu that make the Dakeshi such a danger on the battlefield, and that make us an endless army in combat. Silence answered him. He clearly had the group's complete attention. He pointed down toward one of the caves. Go inside. Everyone did so. The place wasn't one of the Uruhara pathways, but a new base the Naruto clones had built with Jiraiya's teachings and help. It was somewhat far from Konoha, being more than 20 kilometers away, but the Hokage was planning on a second base being built in the village itself. For the moment, this was perfect as a training area. Inside, a dozen clones were waiting, scrolls at the ready. They split into 4 groups and waited. Now, the first technique you'll learn today is the most important, and the one that'll be used the most, Kyuha explained. Like all jutsu you'll learn today, this technique is only to be used by clones, and never by flesh and blood ninja. In humans, it has side effects that'll end your ninja career in months if not sooner. Clones, demonstrate. One of the clones stepped forward and bowed. He then did a few hand seals, then slapped a glowing hand on the floor. As you can see, the technique drains chakra, the Dakeshi leader continued. It affects everything, trees, seals, people, and even nature itself. With it, one of the main flaws of the Kage Bunshin, their limited chakra reserves, can be easily dealt with. I'm pretty sure everyone here can understand the implications. Everyone nodded. Seed did so hard enough that Kyuha was afraid she'd broken something. Now, split up. The clones will teach each of you individually, and will move to the next technique once you've mastered this one. It didn't take long for each Kyokuba member to join his trio of Dakeshi clones, calling a shadow clone as they did so. Even Flower managed to summon a Bunshin regardless of her exhaustion, interested as she was. Kyuha smiled. His team was growing well and fast. Prank Day 174. Thank you, come again. Sho said as the 2 peasants left in a hurry after their purchase. The merchant clone sighed after they were gone. Again, they hadn't learned a thing. The place hadn't been open long, they were only on their 4th day of business. Not that they had much. The Torisan had been clear that this place wasn't a healthy city, and that could be seen in the habits of their clients, especially compared to those of the people in other cities. Here in San no Kuni, they had very little business. Nobody ever came alone, always in pairs or more, and never while there was any other client in the shop. There was no arguing, no window shopping, no haggling, just enough words to order things, if there was even that. And when they left, the clients ran like the fires of hell were after them, sometimes not even waiting for their change. Clearly, nothing good. Unfortunately, that made it so that they could barely gather any information. There weren't any rumors going around, mainly because no one was talking. Which meant they weren't of much help. Sho was about to sigh again when the bell attached to the door rang once more. "Welcome to Kuroneko," he said, looking at the pair who'd just entered. He then forced himself not to tense. Between the fashion group's teaching and Jiraiya's training, the Naruto clones had gotten pretty talented at reading people. And the two civilians who'd come inside rang alarms. As usual, it was a man and a woman, but they weren't like the ordinary clients. The man wore a sword at his belt like he knew how to use it. He wasn't the first to come with a weapon, but the others who'd entered armed clearly had them on only to comfort themselves. This guy was visibly ready to draw at any moment, and the clothes he wore did nothing to hide the fact that he was a warrior. Loose clothes that wouldn't hamper movement, good quality sandals, hints of something rigid under his shirt. Even without the fact that he was looking everywhere as if seeking sources of danger, Sho would bet his life he was a bodyguard. The woman was no better. First, she wore a kimono, which was the first he saw in this place outside the Lord's mansion, with a purse hanging to the side without care. In other places, that would have seemed normal, but here it was another first. He even detected a hint of perfume. It was more than suspicious. "Good day, shopkeeper," she said, bowing very slightly. "Am I speaking to the owner of this place?" "You are." Another first. Nobody had asked this question before in this building. Good, she looked around, stopping when her eyes fell upon the stacked bottles of alcohol behind the counter. "What alcohol selection do you have?" Sho recited his stock from memory. With the small number of sales he'd done, there was nothing he'd lacked stock of. "How about 5 barrels of rice country sake?" she asked. "Of course," he replied automatically. Inside, he was goggling. 5 barrels? Even if that was the only suspicious action she'd taken, it would have been enough. His biggest sale had been 3 bottles, and this was more than an order of magnitude greater. He then turned to the bodyguard. "Does Mr. need anything?" He caught a hint of a scowl before the woman smothered it. "He won't be taking anything." The man just grunted. "I see," he said, tallying the price. She paid without argument, something that raised alarms since he'd put a good 30% markup compared to the normal price, and she didn't even react. He'd expected an argument at the very least. "Will you be taking it with you, or will you need it delivered?" Sho asked. The woman shook her head. "No need for delivery. I'll have someone come get them." "Your receipt, then," he said, handing her the paper. She grabbed it and tucked it in her purse without looking. "Pleasure doing business with you." "Come again," he said, waving. As soon as the door closed behind them, however, he did the cross seal of the Kage Bunshin and informed the other members of the network of what had just happened. He was pretty sure there would be a cat or dog trailing them in the next few minutes. He then set himself to wait. Rare was when they had 2 sets of customers, one right after the other, and 3 had never happened. He probably had at least a good 30 minutes before anything else happened. Maybe he could find a way to train that wouldn't be immediately visible. Prank Day 175. By the afternoon of the 5th day, Team 1 had left the main thoroughfares for smaller roads, those being wide enough for only a single cart to pass. The land was getting bumpier and the ground less maintained, while dense forests surrounded them on both sides. And, after a good 2 hours' march on said road, the group arrived in Fumotocho at last. "That's the city we were waiting for?" Naruto said, turning toward his sensei. "It's barely bigger than a village." Miramara had to admit Naruto was right. The place from what they could see was only somewhat bigger than the roadside villages they'd passed on the way. One could see farms just off the main road, and there were very few businesses on the main street. The only one that drew attention was an inn barely a block away, as it was the tallest building in sight. Indeed, this is where our mission leads, Ebisu replied. While I will agree it is much less populated than Konoha or other such towns, it is still the biggest city in the region. As such, this is the place where the region's administration is concentrated. He looked around. The few people in the street flinched as his team's eyes went over them. The teacher then turned toward his students. Unfortunately, there will be no training while we are in Fumotocho. While larger cities tend to have no issues with ninja due to seeing them more frequently, remote places like this tend to have superstitions regarding our presence. We tend to be associated with death, and that simple fact makes the common man fear us. No need to pour oil over the fire by openly practicing ninjutsu. Hi, his 3 students answered. Fact was, they didn't mind too much. Ebisu had used the 5 days on the road to teach the group a number of low-level ninjutsu that were useful for a ninja on mission. Nothing one would use in combat, but rather small techniques that made life easier. A jutsu to purify water, another to create heatless light, one to blow away dust and remove tracks. All sorts of useful things that made life outside cities easier. Now, while we camped outside the last few nights, we will be staying in an inn tonight, their sensei said, pointing forward at said building. Please remember that you are still on mission, and that you are representing Konoha. As such, no pranks, fooling around or anything of the sort. Hi, the trio repeated, following their teacher. The inn was basically the same thing the many Narutos had seen all over the continent, a bar with tables on the first floor, and a staircase leading to rooms on the second. The place was actually quite clean, compared to the many other examples the Narutos had seen, which boded well. Hello, the old man behind the counter said as the 4 came in. Then his eyes went wide. Shinobi-san, he exclaimed while bowing. It has been a long time since any shinobi stayed at my humble inn. Welcome to the bottom of the hill, sirs, miss. No need to bow before our group, innkeeper, Ebisu replied as he stepped forward. We are simply travelers. Tell me, do you have any rooms you might rent us? This is not the busy season, Shinobi-san, the innkeeper answered. All my rooms are open. How many would you need? 2 please. The old man grabbed a few keys from behind the bar. Please follow me. The civilian stepped out from his workstation, doing a bizarre clacking sound at every step. As he came out from behind the bar, the 3 genin couldn't help but stare. The man had a wooden leg. Eyes front. Ebisu whispered harshly, and unfortunately too late. The old man stopped, realizing he was being stared at. He then smiled. No worries, he said. Everyone stares at first. I'm more than used to it. What happened? Muramaru asked. Well, when I was younger, I was a somewhat skilled hunter, the man explained as everyone walked upstairs. One winter, however, while I was coming back from a hunt, a starving wolf decided that what I'd caught was exactly what he needed. He took me by surprise, and we fought for a while. I ended up killing him, but by that time the wolf had taken a big bite out of my leg. I made it back to the city, but by that time my leg had gotten infected. It was beyond the skills the resident healer, so she cut my leg just below the knee to save me. I carved this leg while I was recuperating in bed, and I've been walking on it ever since. He stopped and pointed to the rooms on the opposite sides of the corridor. These are yours. 2 beds in each. Supper is included and it's 6 tonight. How many nights will you need? 1 should be enough, Ebisu replied. Please pay at supper then, the innkeeper said, walking back toward the bar. I'll leave you to your things, then. One last detail, if you will. Ebisu asked. Yes? Where could I find the person in charge of this city? The special jonin said. Old man Chaochu? The innkeeper replied, stopping. 4 houses down, on the other side of the street. You can't miss it, it's the only place with 2 floors outside the inn. He paused for a moment. It's been a while since I've seen the man though, and usually he comes every evening. He might not be in. Where could we find him then? Their sensei asked. He might be in one of the smaller towns around here, or in one of the surrounding farms, the old man mused. Outside of that, no clue. Thank you, Ebisu said with a small bow. No need, the old man replied, walking away once more. Just happy to have business. The innkeeper had said it true, the lawman in charge was absent when the team visited, and no one had any clue where he might be found. Between training and missions, Sasuke didn't find much time to look into the mystery that was Naruto's graduation. Kakashi could be a slave driver when he was actually training people, and on some days, he couldn't help but fall directly into bed after the team disbanded. Still, he did what he could to listen for whatever was happening in Konoha, hoping for more information. Unfortunately, he'd missed the days directly after the invasion, when the news was fresh, and very little could currently be heard about his blonde classmate since, as he'd found out, the boy was outside the village on his first C rank. Luckily, after a few weeks, he finally got the opportunity he was waiting for. Kakashi had finished the training early, since he needed to accompany Sakura for Mednin testing, while Sakaki had a training bout with Rock Lee, who he saw as a rival. That left him with all the time in the world to go directly to the best source of information. Umino Iruka. This wasn't the first time he'd tried to talk to his former teacher, but the man had been absent repeatedly. It seemed that some days he left the academy at the same time as the students, only to reappear home hours later. This time, however, he was there right as classes ended, pushing his way in while all the students did the opposite. Finding Iruka's office wasn't an issue, as he hadn't moved in the past year, so Sasuke went straight there and knocked. Come in. The genin did so, seeing his former teacher for the first time in months. He wasn't sure, but Umino Iruka seemed in better shape than he'd remembered from his classes with the man. Perhaps the rumors of intense training were true. It would explain the absences, also. Good day, Umino-san. Uchiha Sasuke, the man said, rising and extending his hand. Sasuke saw no reason not to shake. I don't see former students often. What can I do for you? He said, indicating an empty chair. Sasuke sat down in the offered seat. I seek information, he said. Just to confirm, Naruto was promoted to genin, correct? Yes, the teacher replied. Him along with 2 members of the latest class. Did they get the authorization to take the exams early? Iruka shook his head. Then, how did they get promoted? It ate him a little inside that Naruto had found a way to bypass the exams. If he could have started earlier, he'd be that much closer to his brother, he was sure. Iruka took a deep breath. What do you know about the invasion? He asked. Not much, Sasuke admitted. Most people were reluctant to talk much about it, after all the losses. I know that it was Sand and the new village Sound against Konoha, and that Sand surrendered while Sound was beaten back. I don't know most of the details. Okay, the teacher said, preparing himself in his mind. There were multiple hot spots during the invasion, the walls, the summon snakes, the hospital, but the most important was the stadium. Where the last round of the Chunin exams was happening, Sasuke interjected. Exactly, Iruka replied. The reason was clear, that was where the Hokage was, and he was one of the main targets of the attack. Now, the invaders were well prepared, with a sleeping genjutsu over the entirety of the stadium and infiltrators all over the place. I was there myself, with Naruto, and everyone was caught completely by surprise. Sasuke's eyes focused. While he agreed the Iruka was a good teacher, Sasuke wouldn't expect the Chunin to come out undamaged out of such an attack. He'd thought the man had been far from the fighting. Continue. I can't say everything that happened in that arena with all the fighting, the Chunin explained. But one thing was clear, Naruto filled the place with as many shadow clones as he could, taking the fight to the infiltrators. They died in droves, but that way they kept leaf losses to a minimum. Shadow clones? Sasuke asked. Think regular clones, only with the ability to affect reality. Not any more solid, but they can still fight and use techniques. Sasuke nodded at that. Now, I ended up escorting some members of the nobility to a shelter, so I missed the end of the battle, but I've heard that it was Naruto that broke the jutsu that held the Hokage prisoner, which forced Orochimaru to retreat. The Uchiha Jonin couldn't believe it. Dead last, saving the Hokage? That was preposterous. He had to agree, though, that this was the kind of action that deserved promotion. What about the others? Iruka continued. Miromaru, the boy in Naruto's team, reputedly saved the Hokage's life, while also helping civilians to safety, while Joden Ariko, the girl, took out 10 or so enemies of higher rank, and also assisted the Hokage in his battle. The fangirl with 10 kills. He couldn't believe it. But Naruto's exploit was even less believable. How could Naruto have? Iruka interrupted him. Did you ever see Naruto shy from combat? Sasuke couldn't say he did. The blonde boy had many flaws, but fearful had never been one of them. Still, he was dead last. How? What makes you say he was dead last? Iruka asked. Everyone said so. Even the teachers. Then, I have an exercise for you, one that should help become a better ninja, Iruka said with a smile. You had top marks in memory exercises, so you clearly remember information well. Ignore what everyone said about Naruto, and focus on what you saw and lived through. How would you rate him, using only that? Sasuke sat down and thought. Bottom of the class in maths and history. He remembered a few of the exams the blonde had received. Can't use the clone, unreliable substitution. He's seen many examples of both, though he had to agree that he had memories of Naruto succeeding at the Kawarimi. Average weapon throwing. Again, many examples. He then started scowling. Decent taijutsu. While Naruto's forms were horrible, the Uchiha had to agree that he was clearly above Sakura's level, and he'd had some victories against talented students like Sakaki. Very good transformation. Which were mainly used for pranks, but credit was due there. That's all, I think. You're missing trap evasion, where Naruto is among the best in the class, but that's a valid evaluation, the Chunin replied. Now, taking all that into account, what would be your opinion? Now that he thought of it, the only things that really pushed Naruto down were his maths and history grades, which even he believed were overly represented in the exams at a third of the grade. Outside of that, with some good points and some bad ones, Naruto sounded pretty much average. Good, Iruka said. Making valid evaluations of allies and enemies is capital both in battle situations and not. Also, one should always re-evaluate facts based on one's first-hand experiences. Also, there are facts that you are not aware of. Do tell. Some are not mine to tell, but I will tell you what is commonly known, the teacher said. Naruto had special issues that were not caught until recently, and was also the target of deliberate sabotage by at least two teachers. Unfortunately, with Kazuki's escape and the need to bring back the students whose last exam had been sabotaged, the manipulations in the academy hadn't stayed secret very long. Keeping things hidden in a ninja village when students were involved was nearly an impossibility. What? Iruka nodded somberly. I've gone over the numbers, and the Konoha analysts agree with me. Naruto should have scrapped a pass the first time he did the exam, had his notes not been tampered with. And he wasn't the only one. He didn't have words for it. The idea that a paper pusher might have managed to force him to fail, if he'd decided to do so? It made him sick to think about it. Were my own. No, the teacher countered. Your grades were untouched. The group who did this targeted mainly students of civilian families or orphans, people who had no resources to fall back on for shinobi subjects. That was another fact that had managed its way to the rumor mill. Sasuke was silent for a moment, then rose. "Thank you, sensei," he said with a bow. He had to agree, he'd learned more than he'd thought coming here. "I have much to think about." The teacher smiled. "Don't be a stranger. Do come back." "I think I will," the Uchiha replied. "Good day, Yumano-san." "Good day yourself, Uchiha-san." Walking outside, one thing stuck to mind. Sasuke agreed, things seen firsthand were the best source of information. As such, he'd have to see Naruto once he was back and test the blonde genin himself. Yes, that was the best way to go. Team 1 came back to the inn as the sun was coming down. As they had no indication that the lawman was even in the town itself, it was decided that the group would sup and sleep before starting the search the next day. The innkeeper clearly knew Shinobi. He gave the ninjas the table farthest from the door back to the wall. He then delivered a complete roasted chicken with gravy and side dishes for the group. After a few days of travel rations, Naruto had to agree that it looked delicious. However, before they could even start eating, people started streaming in the inn, some going to the bar and some to tables. The old man and a boy, who they supposed was the cook, went back and forth brining food. Ignoring them, Naruto started on his own meal, only to be interrupted by Iruka. "Are they all looking at us?" Naruto turned around and noticed that, yes, Iruka was right. Each and every person at the table was staring in their direction, eyes barely blinking. Even the people at the bar did the same, ignoring their glasses. Turning back to his team, Naruto shivered. "Creepy." "Ignore it," Ebisu said, seemingly unaffected. Reactions like this one are unfortunately common in isolated regions. "This is actually not the worst case I've lived through." He then launched himself into a retelling of one of his missions deep in Fire Country. The people there had been even worse than the citizens of Fumotocho, blaming the passing ninjas for everything that had gone wrong in the last 2 years. It had gotten to the point where Ebisu's team faced a lynch mob, and only the fact that Ebisu's teammate Might Guy had been especially talented in knocking out adversaries instead of killing them had kept the situation from becoming a bloodbath. "I get that," Muramura said, trying to ignore the looks. "Still, it's disturbing." Iruka nodded, handing Ichibo a second carrot. "Then, let us focus on something else," Ebisu said, putting his half-full glass of water at the center of the table, out of sight from the rest of the room. "Look here." He did a pair of hand seals, then put his hands at both sides of the glass. Nothing happened. "Was something supposed to happen, sensei?" Iruka asked. "No," the special Jonin replied. "But watch this." He reached into his pockets, withdrawing a clear vial. Opening it, he let a single drop fall in the glass before putting back in its place. He then made the same set of hand seals once more, and this time, the glass shone clear blue when he put his hands on it. "This jutsu has the following florid nickname, the poison taster's nose," he explained. "And it is a simple one that detects dangerous components in liquids. Ninjas in bodyguard missions use it regularly, and with experience one can even learn to identify what type of poison is inside based on the color of the light." "Now, your turn," he said, waving to the rest of the team. Each of the genin tried in turn, though none managed the technique that night. It did allow them to ignore the looks at least. Prank day 176. The 4 of them were down at breakfast, alone, thankfully, when a man entered the inn, coming straight for them. The genin all tensed for combat, but the man stopped a few feet from the table. He was clearly old, based on the wrinkles and white hair, but was still visibly in shape. He had the tan of a person who worked long hours in the sun, and had an air of authority along that. "I heard you were looking for me, Shinobi-san?" he said, turning toward Ebisu. "You must be the lawman, I suppose." "Indeed," he replied with a booming voice. "I am Chujuru, and I've been placed in charge of this region by the Fire Daimyo. Call me Chaochu, everyone does." He looked at everyone. "Now what can I do for you, sirs, miss?" Ebisu stepped forward. We have a dispatch from Konoha for you, he said, withdrawing and handing the document. Chojiro waited no time, breaking the seal and quickly reading the missive. I see, he finally said. I have the requested documents in my office. Come with me, I'll get them for you. Team, follow. Ebisu ordered, and the three genin rose instantly. No need, the lawman quickly replied. My office is not big enough for all of you anyway. Ebisu thought for a moment, then turned to his team. Pack everything, he said. I want to leave as soon as I return. He made a signal offhand, one of the few he'd thought Team 1. Keep together. He had a bad feeling about this, somehow. The three genin did as ordered, gathering everything in their rooms. Muramura took Ebisu's backpack, and the three retreated in the two male genin had used last night. I'm not the only one who doesn't trust this, right? Muramura said. Nope, said both Iruka and Ichibo. Naruto shook his head. No, I didn't like this place from the moment we got here. Anyone getting flashbacks of San no Kuni? The clone network had already gotten a good number of updates from that region. Both clones nodded. There's clearly something wrong with the people. That level of silence for so long? Not possible. Muramura was about to reply when Ebisu's voice rang out. Team to me. Let's go, Naruto said, rising. The three genin were halfway down the corridor when Ichibo whistled, before jumping intently. Ariko's eyes went wide, and she flicked two fingers at her nose. Rabbits speak for bizarre or uncommon smell. The three quickly took combat positions. I don't smell anything, Muramura said, and Naruto nodded in agreement. The innkeeper walked out of Ebisu's room. Your sensei's downstairs waiting, he said with a smile. Naruto saw something wrong in that smile, and dashed forward. What did you? He started, only to fall on his knees short of his target. Behind him, Ariko and Muramura fell to the ground, unconscious. You ninjas are all the same, He-Man said, no longer hiding his disdain. Always underestimating the weak. He tapped twice of his wooden leg for good measure. Naruto tried to grab the man, but he was losing strength too fast. He left face first to the ground, and could see no more. I love binary poisons, was the last thing Naruto heard before he blacked out. Chapter 26, Depravity. Prank Day 176. Naruto slowly came to. Everything was blurry and distorted, and even with his eyes open he couldn't make sense of things. Luckily it seemed like whatever was causing this was fading, as his sight started clearing up. He shook his head side to side, hoping it would help. Welcome back, he heard somewhat bizarrely. After a second of thought, he recognized Muramura's voice and turned in that direction. It didn't take long for the remaining fuzziness to clear up, and he moved his head around, trying to get a better grasp on the situation. His arms were stuck behind his back, clearly chained, and a look downward revealed his feet were restrained similarly. Also, surprisingly, his shirt had been taken off and paper seals had been placed all over his belly. What? He asked aloud. Yeah, Ariko replied, that was my first reaction too. She was chained on the opposite side of the room, right next to the other clone. You clearly went through a different treatment than we did, she continued, indicating her hands with a movement of her head. Her fingers had been taped together tightly in front of her, while her arms were chained with solid iron links which were bolted to the wall at her back. A quick look at Muramura revealed he'd gone through the same treatment. Naruto wriggled his fingers and found no obstructions. Any ideas why they didn't do the same with my own hands? He asked. No clue, Muramura replied. I can see seals on the chains at your feet, Ariko answered. Those on your arms are probably the same. I guess you're the one who got the special treatment, not us. Why would I? Naruto started. Oh yeah. Queeby. He normally didn't pay much attention to his tenant, but others might not do the same. The other two clones nodded in agreement. Probably, Muramaru answered. There was a moment of silence. Well, anyway, we don't have time to lose, Naruto said. Any clue where we are? Ariko shook her head. None. By what I can remember, you were the last one who lost consciousness, and the both of us were already chained here when we woke up. What about Ichibo? The blonde asked. Ariko made a move with her head, indicating one of the corners of the room. Twisting so he could look in that direction, he noticed the rabbit standing in that corner, immobile. He was restrained as heavily as anybody else in this cell, and didn't react when his name was called. Is he okay? Naruto asked. I'm pretty sure he's still under the effect of what took us down, Ariko replied, a note of uncertainty creeping in her voice. Any clue what it was? Muramaru added. Naruto thought back, trying to remember what had happened earlier. I think he said it was a poison of some sort. Poison? Muramaru echoed, surprised. Aren't we clones immune to poison? That was at least the general idea, especially based on the clones' resistance to alcohol. That's what I thought also, Naruto replied. It's not like we'd tested that part, however. At those words, the two clones looked down. Believing themselves immune was dangerous, especially if they weren't. Anyway, Naruto continued. That's not important right now. What is getting out of here, and as soon as possible. And how are we going to do that? Muramaru said, rattling his chains. We can't do hand seals, we barely have any leeway to move, and we're chained to the very walls. Said walls were stone, and looked very sturdy. How can we manage that? Naruto nodded, face serious. Then, let's figure out what we can do without hand seals. Anything comes to mind? Well, Ariko said from her spot. There's already a few things. Mostly chakra exercises, but Hara Coil 3.4. Diaphragm Coil 3.1. Central Lung Coil 3.7. That and the sound of a quill on paper were the only things Ebisu could hear as he came to. Since he had no clue where he was, he did his best not to react in any way, keeping his eyes closed as he cast his mind back to how he'd gotten here. The last thing he remembered was following the lawman back to his office. He'd been on edge, he couldn't tell what, but some instinct was telling him things weren't as he'd suspected. Still, the lawman made no offensive move, leading him directly to his office, and withdrawing the requested documents from his desk. The special Jonin remembered that he'd not even touched the documents, preferring to use a variation of the leaf-floating method to grab them. The first was what had been requested, and he'd fallen while reaching for the second. He couldn't think of anything else. Welcome back to the land of the living, Ninja-san, a voice came from above. I was starting to think you had an uncommon reaction to my poison. The antidote normally works much quicker. Ebisu could hear the smile in the man's voice. Though, I will suggest that you should train your body more, Ninja-san. I've rarely had a high-level ninja with such a weak body pass through my hands. Ebisu opened his eyes to find a man standing right above him. He had short white blonde hair that was slicked back and ended at his nape, along with a bizarre seal right in the middle of his forehead. He wore an open white lab coat with casual clothes underneath, nothing that especially drew attention. No, what immediately drew the eyes were the glasses he wore. Steel gray, they were nearly a half mask with how much of his face they covered. Also, one couldn't see his eyes through the lenses, and not because they were tinted. No, the effect was similar to a microscope, distorting the eye beneath. I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself. The man said cheerfully. My name is Shinsei Shokuen, and this place is my very own lab. Ebisu tried rising, only to fail as bands of metal held him down. What am I doing here? He asked. You are here to help the advancement of knowledge, of course. Shokuen replied with a smile, sounding as if such a thing was self-evident. We don't get many Konoha shinobi here, but your fire nature will be perfect for many tests. The blonde's hands formed into seals. Now, please stay still. We wouldn't want to generate invalid data, would we? Ebisu's eyes went wide. You're a ninja? There had been no indication of such a thing, no Hittite, no weapons or armor. Not even the classic scars and other bodily consequences of shinobi life. Never call me that. The man spat out, his cheerful demeanor vanishing in an instant. I'm a chakra scientist, not one of those stupid brutes that care only about money and violence. He put his hand on the immobile Ebisu's throat, and paralyzed the special jonin from the throat down. None of them care about research, progress or anything like that. They only care about killing each other off. He stooped for a second. There are exceptions though, such as my own sensei. Thank the kami for them, or humanity would have killed itself off by now. It didn't take long for Ebisu to guess who the man's sensei was. You work for Orochimaru, the special jonin spat out accusingly. Shukuen didn't notice the tone. Great man, isn't he? He replied. He might have started as a ninja, but he's really like me, a scientist at heart. He understands what's truly important, and that sacrifices have to be made in the name of science. He grabbed something to the side, and shoved it into Ebisu's mouth. He then tied it off solidly. MMPH. The special jonin grunted, his words made incomprehensible by the plastic ball between his teeth. I'm sorry, but I have to test your brain's pain response now. We need to have everything noted down before we proceed to the next batch of tests, you see. The scientist grabbed a bladed tool from a tray beside the table. Now, let's... Almost there. Naruto said as he watched the proceedings. Muramaru inched his foot forward as Iruka forced herself to stay immobile. It took 3 tries, but he finally managed to hook his foot right where he wanted. Got it, the male clone said. Just a little more. He pushed his foot forward a tiny bit, forcing Iruka's side pocket open millimeter by millimeter. So? Iruka asked hopefully. Muramaru let his foot fall back down. Nothing. Pocket's empty. Damn. Naruto swore. That's another thing out. Anything else? The 3 Narutos had spent the last hour trying to figure out ways of escaping their chains, listing things they could do without hand seals. Unfortunately, they hadn't gotten any results yet. The Academy's escape techniques weren't enough for solid chains like these. Both the leaf floating technique and the chakra shield didn't affect the bandages that were preventing them from using Justu, and while they might be able to prime tags without their hands, their captors had not forgotten to remove every weapon they had on themselves. Naruto himself was even unable to use chakra, which was either because of the seals on his stomach or the chains on his limbs. This wouldn't have been such an issue if they'd had some clone backup available. Unfortunately, the 3 Narutos had taken Ebisu's warning seriously, and hadn't used any ninjutsu since entering Fumotocho. Not that it would have mattered since, with the low population of the city, the clones would have been evident from the start. I can't think of much, Iruka replied. Only thing left that comes to mind is the tree walking technique. That's the opposite of what we want. Naruto said with a sigh. We want to make things leave, not make them stick. Muramaru's eyes went wide at those words. I'm an idiot, he said, causing the others to turn towards him. Clearly focusing, he started channeling chakra to his fingers. What are you trying to do? Iruka asked. Muramaru didn't answer, continuing to concentrate. A ripping sound echoed through the room, followed by another, then another. After a minute of such sounds, Muramaru spread his fingers wide, then let them flow into a familiar pattern. He then disappeared from his spot, appearing on the other side of the room. Naked. Oops, he said as he looked down. I think I left too much behind. He then walked back to the chains to withdraw his shirt and pants. How did you do that? Both Naruto and Iruka asked. You remember Kiritori's lesson on the tree walking technique, right? He answered as he dressed himself. The two others nodded. Remember what happens if you put too much chakra into the technique? It damages the... Naruto said, then realized what the male clone had meant. Right. He looked down and tried channeling chakra once more. Nothing happened. Doesn't work with what I have, he said with a sigh. Not surprising, Nuremara said as he made sure everything was properly in place. Beside him, tears were already appearing in Iruka's restraints. We'll help you out as soon as Iruka's free. The boy then went to help his female compatriot escape. It didn't take long before she was free, even managing to use Kawarimi, while leaving only the chains behind. She then quickly went to the corner where Ichibo was staying and stripped him of his bindings. That done, she put a hand on his chest and slowly smiled. He's fine, she revealed, placing the rabbit on her head. Both Naruto and Nuremara released a sigh of relief at those words. That was one less thing to worry about. How about my chains? The blonde asked. The paper seals weren't an issue, but removing those didn't allow Naruto to escape as the other two had. The two clones tried everything from replacement techniques to wind chakra, but, in the end, they were forced to melt the chains and manacles down with Akaraka Jigoki. Doing so unfortunately took time as they had to be careful, which meant it was another hour before the seals had melted enough for Naruto to escape. Now what, boss? Nuremaro asked. Normally, he wouldn't be calling Naruto that, but this was nothing close to a normal situation, and the three of them were alone here. We're getting out of this cell and finding Sensei. Any issue with that? He asked. The two clones shook their heads. It's quite possible he's already been captured, Iruka added. Naruto nodded. Since Konoha genin teams were always attached to a more experienced ninja, common sense would be to go after the jonin first. Anyway, I'm filling this place with clones. If Sensei is inside, we'll find him. If not, I'm pretty sure we'll draw enough attention that he'll come around soon enough. You know that's gonna draw the attention of every enemy in this place, right? Nuremaro asked. Fine by me, the blonde genin answered with a bloodthirsty grin. I'm not gonna hold back, not now. With what's happening in the village and Sensei missing, there's definitely some backsides in need of kicking. You two with me? Always, Iruka said, while Nuremara nodded. One cross seal later, a dozen more Naruto appeared in the room. Seconds later, a stream of fire melted the lock that was holding them prisoner, and all of them rushed out. Let's go, people! Naruto yelled and was answered by battle cries from the rest of his team. You really should take care of yourself better, you know, Shokuin said as he finished with another medical scanning technique. Your liver's resistance to toxins is downright pathetic for a career shinobi. Ebisu resisted the urge to yell once more. Not only was he tied to a table, stripped near naked, and analyzed like a piece of meat, but his tormentor had the gall to complain about just about everything regarding his body. Yes, he knew he wasn't the example of physical perfection that his teammate Guy was, but having it pointed out to his face in clinical terms was pouring salt on the wounds. Still, with the gag in place, there wasn't much he could do anyway. The special jonin heard the door open, and then the clack of wood on tile. He recognized the sound, that was the innkeeper's leg for certain. Ebisu realized that they'd been in the enemy's lair from the start and hadn't noticed. He mentally swore at himself, he should have been more careful. Master, the genin have escaped, the innkeeper said as he advanced. The door was forced and the alarms rang. Really? Shokuin replied. He looked at the side, where Ebisu could see a clock from the corner of his eyes. They should still be unconscious, and for at least 5 more hours. You did restrain the lot of them like I told you? Yes, he said, then recited his orders. Both pairs of chakra seals on the blonde boy. 8 chakra siphons on his stomach along with 4 coil blockers, placed as you directed. The other two were tied like every other ninja we've captured. One of them must have some special bloodline technique or something, the scientist replied. He'd only done a cursory scan of their chakra and nothing else. He should have done deeper tests. No matter. Release all the experiments, that should take care of them. Which suit do you want? I'll take the last Earth one, it's the best you've gotten me since my first. Ebisu could hear the raw satisfaction there was in those words. He didn't know what they meant by suits, but he wasn't looking to find out. Let me just stop things here and I'll transfer you, the scientist then turned to Ebisu. I'm sorry, but duty calls. Don't worry, I'll be back later for more tests. We'll have some good times together, you and I. MMPH. Ebisu tried yelling as the man's chakra-enhanced palm reached for his face, but once more the gag stopped him. He wanted nothing to do with the man's tests, and questioned the sanity of anyone who thought otherwise. Then fingers touched his brow, and he knew no more. The place was a complete labyrinth. Running down long corridors with barely enough light, the three Narutos felt it was a little like being inside the Uruhara tunnels. Those tunnels, however, didn't have side rooms every few dozen meters. Up until now, the group had found only cells, with nothing worse inside than a dead rat. Still, they checked everything. It wouldn't do to miss Ebisu's cell simply because they'd skipped one or two. Incoming! One of the clones scouting ahead of the pack said before diving to the side. Still, that didn't help as a claw swipe burst him as the enemy passed by. It wasn't anything the Naruto clones had seen before. It had a wolf's head on a gorilla's body, with a crocodile's tails and way too many arms. 6 of them to be exact, with 3 different pairs. All the pieces were attached together by bizarre black thread, crudely stitched in a way that shouldn't work, but still did. The clones in front didn't wait, charging 3 at the time. 2 died before doing anything, but the last managed to electrocute the beast before disappearing. It fell down in a heap, dead on the spot. Well, Niramara said as Naruto generated another dozen Kagebunshin. That wasn't so tough. Not 4 seconds after those words, another patchwork chimera rushed down the corridor. This one got no farther than the previous one, taking 3 clones with it. Another 2 creatures ran forward screaming before it even hit the floor. Defensive formation. Naruto yelled, creating more copies. He then stepped back as Bunshin formed protective lines in front of the Genin team. Against them, wave after wave of unnatural beasts pushed forward, biting and clawing everything in their way. The situation quickly became a stalemate. On one side, the monstrous beasts seemed endless and ever different, while on the other Naruto used the side rooms to summon more clones, bolstering the lines. The fact that the corridor was barely 2 meters wide meant that the numbers that could effectively fight were limited, and the lack of ranged weapons, or time to prepare more powerful techniques, made it so the clones were the ones doing all the fighting. Simple punches and kicks weren't enough, and they hadn't been able to retrieve their weapons as of yet. This bloody, close fighting went on for more than 5 minutes before one of the clones found a better way. Instead of directly taking the charge of some bizarre bear-bull-tiger mix, he dodged to the side, climbing up the wall to stay outside the creature's reach. He then jumped on its back and shocked the creature before being dispelled by the lightning technique. Follow that example. Naruto yelled. Luckily for the group, the first who did so was a clone trying to rush over the enemy lines. As soon as he was above the combat, he took an arrow to the knee and turned to smoke. What? Ariko cried out. None of that, Shinobi-san, a unknown voice echoed over the beastly howls. It came from somewhere between 2 of the lights, making the source invisible in the dark. I'm sorry to say, but the curfew is in effect. You should all return to your rooms to sleep some more. Who are you? Naruto yelled back. What, you don't recognize me? The voice answered, a hint of a smirk clearly audible. You kids, you make an old man sad. Old man? Niramara replied, perplexed. And that's the third, the voice answered. Muramaru, was it? How do you know? The male clone yelled back. You'd be surprised at what an innkeeper hears, kid, the voice said. Well, good night all. At that, something shattered right over the heads of the genin. All three jumped to the side, expecting an explosive, but nothing like that came. You missed, Naruto retorted victoriously. Oh, did I? Naruto's elation was short-lived, as Muramaru and Iruka fell right beside him. His knees failing, he forced himself to cross his arms, channeling all that he could into what might be his last technique. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He yelled, only for the floor to welcome him back into darkness. Naruto was unfortunately more of a doer than a thinker. That was why, when faced with a dangerous situation, he tended to act instead of doing the smart thing, like informing the rest of the network of the latest happenings. As it often did, this meant that all the clones had only been updated once the first Bunshin fell in battle. Not the way one preferred learning about a situation. Of course, orders had been dispatched quickly. Konoha, who had the most experience leading troops during such a situation, had quickly given orders. The clones closest to Fumotocho, who were part of the merchant network, had been ordered to send support as fast as possible. They were, however, hours away at quickest speed, and that was if they didn't miss the paths that the team had taken. Other clones were dispatched. Suya informed the Hokage of what was happening as soon as she was free, and he ordered the network to find Jiraiya as soon as possible, and to order him straight to Fumotocho. He seemed to have an idea about who was the cause of this, and wanted the Toad Sage on the scene pronto. The clones, however, were one step ahead. Sara was a former guard of the merchant network, and she'd been one of those dispatched to find the Sannin from the very moment they'd first been informed about Naruto's situation. There were 24 like her, all over the village, trying to find the older shinobi. Unsurprisingly, most were concentrated on the red light district, which was where Jiraiya could usually be found. Sara had another target in mind. Last time she was out of the tunnels for ramen, she'd heard rumors of perverts spying on women relaxing in the hot springs. She hadn't given the matter much thought, but now that she was looking, she wouldn't be surprised to find that Jiraiya was the source of those rumors. And, as the man himself had said, a rumor always had bits of truth at its source. It wasn't like a single clone outside the brothels would make much difference anyway. Doing quick replacements, she efficiently canvassed the many hot springs close to the wall. Nothing, nope, nothing, a singular cat, nothing. What was that? Perched on the side of the wall, there was someone there. Sara couldn't tell who it was, as the man, she supposed, had some form of camouflage coat hanging over his shoulders. She wouldn't have noticed him if not for the slight movement of a pen of some sort drawing her attention. One last switch brought her right beside the man. From this close, Jiraiya's white hair was evident, and he had a lecherous smile going from ear to ear. He was also mumbling something, but it was too low to be heard, a fact she was glad for. Sensei, the Hokage is calling for you, she said clearly when it was evident he hadn't registered her presence. Hiruzen knows I'm busy right now, their mentor in spycraft replied, not taking his eyes from the hole he was looking through. His fingers wrote out 3 more lines, and Sara could swear he was about to start drooling. Naruto's in danger, she continued. Jiraiya went instantly from his crouch to looking at her in the eyes as if he'd teleported. Gone was the perverse grin, and the man's glare was all business. Clone? Sara nodded. Situation. Jiraiya didn't blink, staring her down intently. Naruto was taken down and captured in Fumotocho, the location of his C-ranked mission, she explained. He managed to free himself, but he's currently fighting some sort of bizarre patchwork beasts along with at least a poison specialist. It's in some form of underground base, probably close to the village. The Toad Sannin scowled. Orochimaru. The next second, he clapped his hand on the ground, and the largest toad Sara had ever seen appeared before him. He wasted no time jumping on the amphibian's back. Fumotocho on the double. The toad's leap was prodigious, taking Jiraiya right to the wall, with a second carrying him out of sight. Sara didn't know what to do for a second. She'd completed her mission, but things didn't feel right. An idea quickly came to mind, and she didn't waste a second before implementing it. A pair of kawarimi took her beyond the wall, and 5 more allowed her to catch up to their teacher. "You coming with me?" Jiraiya said, not moving from his position on his summons. "How else are you going to get updates?" Sara replied, sticking herself to the amphibian's back. It wasn't something she'd practiced, so it would be good training at least. "Real-time situation updates, right?" Jiraiya said with a grin. "I could live with that." "You have a name?" Sara, the clone, replied as she sent an update to the network. "Ha ha ha." The man laughed. "That brings back memories." "Well, Sara, hang on tight. We've got at least an hour's road to Fumotocho, and Gamasoko here's a fast but bumpy ride." The wave of newly spawned clones, which was the largest to date, saw the 3 genin go down as they appeared. As such, they reacted instantly. "Fan out." The clone who'd appeared closest to Naruto said. "Those in the back, I need drainers and spheres. Front, we need to push forward and make some space." They couldn't play for time anymore. "Whoa." The clones yelled in unison, charging forward. Arrow after arrow pelted those who had appeared on the walls and ceiling, but the number of bunshin thinned slowly. Those arrows that didn't break were gathered, if only to have extra weapons to use. "What are you?" The voice demanded, an undercurrent of fear now clear in his tone. "Your end," the leader replied with a scowl. Another clone had a flash of inspiration. With some judicious use of Akiraka Jigoki, he'd weakened the hinges on one of the doors enough that a couple of clones could rip it out. It was then given to a pair of bunshin on the ceiling, who accepted the impromptu shield gladly. Using said protection, the duo charged forward at speed, the few clones still above dropping to thin the beastly herd. Behind them, a horde followed, regardless of cover. Arrows still thinned their ranks, but they were now advancing fast toward their foe. That can't be." The man cried as he fired while stepping back. "No genin can do something like that." "Watch us," the pair of shielding clones replied, echoed by a number of those following. There was a last shot from the archer, then the man was heard running away at full speed, leaving the clones with only the beasts. With him gone, the chimeras were quickly eliminated, as the few who could reach the ceiling weren't enough to counter the few hundred bunshin left. The Naruto clone who'd taken command looked around as the last few humanoid beasts breathed their last. "Everyone, teams of 6. Go on and scout. I want Ebisu and that archer found. Rip the doors out and use them as shields, no reason to get sniped." "Hi," the many clones replied, acting as ordered. The group that already had a door ran forward, accompanied by 4 more bunshin, while the rest started gathering more shields. The leading clone moved to the group that had taken up the original trio's protection. That was the largest group at 10. 4 had hands on Naruto's back, replenishing their reserves in case of combat. While they could drain chakra from the air or the walls, it wasn't as fast or effective as draining people, Naruto especially. In a case like this, the extra time wasn't worth it. "You 10 are staying with me and the team, we're getting out as soon as an exit is found," the leader said. "We already have troops on the way, and it's better if we can point them directly to the base. Not to mention I want everyone who fell unconscious as far from here as we can get them." He didn't know why the poison hadn't worked on the new clones while taking down the originals, but now wasn't the time to think of such things. There would be plenty of time in the future to do so. He then sat down in the cell the group had chosen and waited behind an impromptu barricade. An exit would be found, they just had to wait until then. Shukua knew he should have gone back to the Konoha ninja in his lab, but he couldn't help but make sure his masterpiece was still in perfect condition. It was the crowning achievement of his scientific career. The body was solid enough to maintain the grudge near indefinitely, and it was built of the greatest parts he'd harvested over the years. The control system was more complex than any other suit he had in this place, but it was worth it for the results it gave. But, as usual, his time admiring his greatest work was once again cut short. Jero ran in like the Shinigami's hounds were after his soul, and went straight for him. "Master," he cried out, clearly winded. Surprising, given the body he was in. "We have to escape." "Escape?" Shukuen repeated, confused. "Why would we escape?" "The swarm." He continued. "The swarm is coming, and it won't stop." "The swarm?" The scientist asked, not making sense of what was said. "I send you against a trio of genin, the lowest actual ninja, and you come back yelling about a swarm?" The blonde-haired man suddenly noticed a detail. Did you run out of arrows?" That was surprising. Jero was a crack shot with a bow at any distance, and the suit he wore only made him deadlier. "Yes," Jero finally answered, looking down. "I shot and shot and shot, but there were always more targets to remove. Every single one another of those orange boys, and they took down the beasts too at the time." "Shadow clones," Shukuen replied. That wasn't so dangerous. If Jero was right, with those numbers they'd fall out of chakra exhaustion soon enough. Even with whatever was sealed on that boy. "Go back," the scientist said, handing the hunter a pair of quivers. "The clones are just a ploy, they'll disappear soon enough." "Are you crazy?" the servant replied. "They're infinite." Shukuen sighed. There was no such thing as infinite chakra, everyone who used it knew that very well. But Jero had never been a ninja, and had never had any form of chakra training, so superstitions like that did appear from time. "They aren't, I can promise you," the scientist explained. "Depending on that boy's reserves, they may even already have disappeared. Kage Bunshin aren't made to be used in great numbers, especially not by genin." "Genin? Really?" Jero asked, unsure. Shukuen nodded. "Really?" The servant turned to the door, only to find the lock and handle reddening quickly. It burst open a second later, and 4 similar faces could be seen on the other side. "Found you!" they chorused in an eerie echo. The tunnels near the cells had widened into a full complex once the clones had escaped from the part they had been imprisoned in. With all the crisscrossing corridors they found, the teams split up in every direction, trying to find their targets. They still opened every door, not leaving a single room unsearched. And most of the times, they wished they hadn't done so. Judging by the number of rooms, this base had once been the home of a much larger contingent of people than the number they'd already faced. There were numerous labs, each equipped differently, clearly prepared for whatever gruesome experiments they were used in. And oftentimes, there were still results of those experiments to be found. There were limbs and claws hanging from hooks here, and there as eyeless faces of both humans and animals stood in proud places upon various tables. There were human chests open for all to see, some with organs missing, some not. Everything was abnormally fresh, with no traces of decomposition, or the like, something the many Narutos attributed to the seals that could be found everywhere. More than a single clone tried purging their non-existent lunches at the site, and those that did not could only feel an uncommonly strong rage surging from their core. This was even worse than Gato and Wave. This was plainly inhuman. The leader of the 5th group was one of those who raged. Actions like this shouldn't fly, not in any self-respecting world. He and his group went from room to room, checking each face in turn. Ebisu hadn't been found yet, which was both a good thing and a bad one. Bad because he was still missing, and whoever had done this could be doing the same to him any minute. Good because they hadn't found anyone alive yet. If Ebisu had been found, it would have been in any state the clones would care to see their sensei in. The groups were receiving regular updates as the various teams finished their assigned corridors. By the time the 5th group was halfway done with their own path, they finally received one of the updates they were looking for. "Sensei found," it said. Along that was the last sight of the sending Bunshin, that of Ebisu stripped to his boxers lying tied up and unconscious on an operating table. The thumbs up of the clone beside him was especially helpful in that regard. Ebisu was barely breathing, and without that part of the vision there might have been doubts. That news brought the morale of the team back up, and they rushed through the next rooms. Since Sensei had been found, there was no need to check every face that stood frozen. If it wasn't an enemy or an exit, there was no reason to dally. 8 rooms later, the clone at point stopped the whole group. "Shush!" he whispered, and everyone stopped. With all the beasts dead and the clones being as widespread as they were, the place should be completely silent. But not here, as voices could be heard coming from farther down the corridor. The sounds were much too low for words to be made out, but it was still the first indication of their foes since that archer escaped. The 6 clones didn't hesitate, skipping forward as silently as possible. The room the voices came from was quickly found, and it was a big one, judging by the closest doors on the same side. With only hand signs, the leader quickly ordered everyone around. A single black sphere was brought up to melt the lock open, while a clone at the back updated everyone. The 2 shield bearers stood doors at the ready, prepared for any incoming attack. This door was no more resistant than any before, and the metal melted in second. A good kick later, and they were in. "Found you!" All 4 clones at the door said in chorus as only Bunshin could. The archer reacted instantly, losing a single shot directly at the clones. It hit only metal, as the blockers had been ready for such a thing. Now that they were in an area with more light, the archer could clearly be seen. He was a tall man with the usual scars ninjas acquired during their lives, with short cropped hair and a solid build. Like all the beasts though, he had changes all over. His eyes were more animal-like than human, and there was an extra pair of feline ears laying atop his head in addition to his human ones. But most evident was the extra arm at his back. The man was clearly practiced with it, as he used it to reload his bow at a rate that was phenomenal. Behind him was a blond man in a lab coat, who the clones supposed was his boss. The rage rose again at the sight. This was the horrible person who'd done such things. Behind him were more examples of his inhumanity. Even though the bodies there were clearly in a better state, the stitches could easily be seen from their position. The light and the size of the room had another advantage, which the clones used quickly. After quick kawarimi, they were spread all over the room, no longer at the mercy of the archer. 2 of the Bunshin attacked him, while the 4 others went directly to the person they saw as the mastermind. The archer managed a last kill before being taken down with a Saisho Hoden, while the scientist released a short-ranged wave of lightning that only a single clone dodged. Irritating, the man said, only for another clone team to enter the room. Behind them, more could be heard, all rushing toward combat. This didn't have the expected reaction from the man, who smiled. "Well," he said. "It seems it's time for some actual battle testing, then." He did 4 hand seals, and slammed the palm of his hand to his forehead. "Ian Shinten Bunshin no Jutsu," he yelled as he did so, his body falling to the ground. And deeper in the room, everything rumbled as a giant rose from his resting place, a bizarre echoing laughter ringing all over the place. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.